What's going on, everyone? Thomas Jordan here for another episode. Today, we are joined by ADHD and Dyslexic Coach for Corporations, Kristina Proctor. How's it going?
It's going pretty well. Thanks for having me today.
Yeah, no, I we were just talking off camera on how uh, I struggle with ADHD and dyslexic. So when I found you on TikTok, I was like, oh, we definitely have to have a conversation because I know there's other creators out there who are, going through the exact same thing. But before we dive into that, how did you get started working with corporations in this sort of field? Because I know even going through school and things like that,
Mhm.
there was nobody to help us out. So I'm just wondering how you got there.
Yeah, so I work with individuals and larger organizations on how to best empower people who are neurodivergent, which means people who have ADHD, dyslexia, or autism. And I got in this because I myself have ADHD and dyslexia, and I was on the struggle bus for decades about this. And I'm actually somebody who was diagnosed late in life, which is very common for women because we have a tendency to have a different type of ADHD called inattentive type. And
Hmm.
so that's our hyperactivity essentially is more in our brain than outwardly. And so, but what that does is it feeds your anxiety. So for me, for decades, I didn't understand why I just could not function sometimes. I would go really fast for a really long time and have lots of energy and be excited about new projects. And then I would just burn out or just get bored. So I got in this because I did really well and enjoyed strategic planning when I worked in corporate organizations. And I loved mentoring people and helping them set goals that were realistic for their businesses. And then also working with people to set realistic goals for themselves. And once I found out that I had ADHD, everything started to click. So my multi-passionate ability, have gone from working in radio to publishing to marketing to working with people and individuals in consulting. And this landed in it. I feel like it's all of the mixtures together and really being able to help people do something and succeed in their life. And so my mantra is I help people with ADHD reach their big, audacious goals without burning out. And that is what I strive to do every day. And I finally was able to figure out how to do that for myself. And I want to share it with other people.
That's amazing. Did you, and it's funny because you said it hit you later in life. That's what happened to me. It happened, I think, around 25 and being in
Mm,
broadcasting, and it affects everybody differently.
yeah.
How did it affect you, and how did you figure out you had it?
So I was diagnosed with dyslexia when I was in high school, and when that happens, sometimes you're allowed to have accommodations in school, which is wonderful. So you can get extended testing time, you can go to a different place to take the test, so you can focus, extra tutoring, things of that nature. But it's all about giving you some extra versus giving you actual strategies to get helped. So it impacted me later in life because what I was needing at work were accommodations, because you can get accommodations if you have certain paperwork from your doctor. So I went to go get that paperwork and they said, well, you don't have your official paperwork from your high school. So it'd be beneficial for you to get re-diagnosed again. And I was like, fine. So I went through this diagnostic exam, and I will be frank, like A, insurance doesn't pay for it, and B, it's expensive, and C, it was exhausting and a
Yeah.
little traumatizing. And so at the end of it though, they said, we think you also have ADHD. And I was shocked, but it explained so much. And what happened to me later in life is that I had put all these coping strategies in place. I was what looked like I was incredibly organized, but if I wasn't, I would fall apart because it's just kind of how life went for me. And as I, got married, had a kid, went through a divorce, went through life, pandemic, all of those coping strategies no longer worked, which is very common for adults with ADHD. As they've gone through their life, their coping strategies that they thought were just normal living were actually strategies for them to function. And
Mhm.
so as those things that used to work for me were stripped away, I didn't know what to do anymore. So I went to my bosses and the HR department asking for accommodations once I got that diagnosis, and was able to get them, thankfully. And you can't always get everything you want, but it basically started manifesting in other ways where my focus was terrible, my memory was getting worse, and I needed ways and strategies to be able to function in life and at work in general. And so that started my journey getting to this place, which was very different from when I was younger.
Yeah, it's just interesting how we cope with things, because I didn't find out until I was about 25, but in high school, without knowing, and I mean, I graduated '04, so from 2000 to 2004, that's when I was in high school, and I just remember like studying for tests, and it's just I could study forever, and still I would get like I would either fail or get C's. So for me, it was easier to cheat. And I cheated a lot. Like if I seriously could write a book on high school cheat, like and it's just funny because it was almost like a survival tactic, because I had to pass. So I mean, the lengths that I would go through to get stuff done was insane. And I remember this girl turned around, because I used to pay her to let me look at her math test. She's like, "You do know you can study for this, right?" I'm like, yeah, I just,
I
it's like,
could.
yeah, I could, but it just doesn't work. But at the time, I just didn't know what it was. And even if I did, I feel like I just wouldn't want to be treated different. I don't know.
That's right.
And then when I figured it out when I was in my first news job, and reading a teleprompter is my Achilles heel, because the way dyslexia, and I'm self-diagnosed, by the way, and we'll talk about that in a second, but the way it affects me is when I read, all the sentences run together as one, and in about every third or fourth sentence, it like jolts. And that's if I'm holding it still. So imagine that happening while words are moving. Yeah, exactly. And my news director one time, he's like, I have never met somebody who can do a live shot with no script, talk for 30 minutes without stopping, missing a beat. But when the words are directly in front of you, he's like, you never have a clean read. You always stumble. And I was like, I don't know. I don't know. And then I Googled it, and it was like, oh, signs of dyslexic. I'm like, that's not it. And then it happened at another job, and I was like, I really need to nip this in the bud. And that's what it was. And it was just like, uh-oh. Like, how am I supposed to do my job when I can't read? And I can read, but
you can read, of course you can.
Yeah. But it's just weird, because I've had to figure out, because I'm curious what your strategies are and how it affects you and how you deal with it. Because even when I'm doing like YouTube videos, I still use a prompter, but I have found little ways to like shift the words over so I can like process, but I still screw up all the time.
And the experience that you're describing is on point for dyslexia. And so that's one of those things where you do develop your own coping strategies. Some people find it helpful to do different types of font types that are better for dyslexics.
Interesting.
And so there's different font types, especially now, because there's more research about it. And there's more, get this, people who are neurodivergent, autistic, dyslexic, ADHD, highly creative people, incredibly passionate people. And so they started making fonts that make more sense for their brains, and it's faster to read. And so I can share some of those with you that you can share with your audience. I forget the titles of them. Of course, I forgot what the titles are.
It's okay. We'll put it in the description below.
Notes. Yeah. So I can definitely share that. But it has helped because it gives you the ability to separate the words out. And that way, the problem that you're having with the teleprompter is lessened. And so there's tools like that. So people use those fonts when they're using e-readers. They use those fonts when they're just reading on their computer, and it's a font that you can install. Some of them are free, some of them are not. But there's certain tools like that people are using to continue to learn and read, but it's a challenge for sure. And mine is very similar, where I can see the word at the beginning and the end, but the letters in the middle, I know they're there, but I can't really read them very well.
Mm-hmm.
Like sounding out words is difficult for me, especially if they're very complicated.
Yeah.
So
And even in news, when I'm having to like read, like where words are very important, like I would read
yes.
something and then we would go back and watch it and they're like, what did you say here? Or why did you say that? And I'm like, what do you mean? And I look
Yeah.
back and he's like, the words are right there. And I get that used to trigger me so bad because it's like, not get mad at them, but get mad at myself. And it's like
Yes.
and I always say, and I don't know if you relate to this as well, but I felt stupid.
Oh,
And
yes.
people can come, I have the thickest skin known to man, like say what you want, like whatever. But for some reason, that is the worst thing you could possibly say to me. And like, it's bad. Like I mean,
Yeah.
I've coped with that as well, but I don't know if you can relate to that as well.
And that is I wish I didn't have to say it like this, but it is so common to hear people with ADHD and dyslexia or autism, when people who are neurotypical, meaning they don't have brains that are wired like ours,
Mm-hmm.
come and say, this is so easy. Why can't you do this?
Oh, yeah. That was,
And
yep.
that kids with ADHD, dyslexia, autism are told roughly 20,000 times more that either they're wrong or they're redirected in childhood. And that hits really difficult for people like us with a neurodiverse brain, because we start to believe it. We start to believe that there is something inherently wrong with us. And the reality is that there's not. The reality is that we just don't fit in the box that you want to put us in. And this world was built for a neurotypical world where our brains are just very different. And the problem is that neurotypicals don't necessarily see. It's not a problem. The beauty of our brains that neurotypicals don't see is that it might take us a little bit longer to get a concept. But once we do, we're connecting it to all of the multi-passionate endeavors that we've had throughout our life. So we can see 3 dimensions of a problem and solution. And so, but we can't get there until we recognize that we're not stupid, that we're not dumb, that we're not slow. It's one of those things where we have to learn to empower ourselves to be who we really are and use the brain that we were beautifully given. But that's a challenge in a neurotypical world when they see something as easy, quote unquote, easy, and it might be easy for them, but for us, it's not.
Yeah, it's so funny you say that because like I always tell people I have a super long learning curve, but once I've got it, I've got it. I call it the click. Because when I had
Yes.
to go back to my first news job, like I was on camera, I had on camera experience, but it was just different from what I was doing here in Atlanta to Colorado. And it was like I was starting over. But once I had enough reps, I mean, my first job was a weatherman, right? I was terrible for
Yeah.
like 6 to 8 months, but it was interesting because there was 3 of us, the main guy, and then the main guy was like on vacation for 3 months for whatever reason. The morning guy quit. And then so I was the only guy. So I was working around the clock, constantly just falling on my face. But
Yep.
then something happened one day where it just clicked. Like I felt like my brain shift. It was almost like a puzzle, like one of those maze things you see in the movies, just shift and clicked. And I could do
There's no
weather.
stopping you.
Yeah, I could do that in my sleep. There was times where I would like black out during a weathercast. And
Yes.
yeah, and then I would come back and we would like go to commercial and my boss slash news director would be like, dude, what was that? That was the best one you've done.
And
And
you're like, I don't know what I did.
I had no idea what I said. I was like, I have no idea what I just said. He's like, what do
Yeah.
you mean? He's like, haha. I'm like, no, seriously, I blacked out. Like, I literally have no
Yeah.
idea what just happened.
Absolutely.
And he looked at me
So,
like I was crazy.
yeah. But that happens to us all the time. When we get in our zone of genius, we're able to just go. So it's very common that I hear from people who are in roles like you have been as a journalist. It's high intense, crisis management. You're dealing with lots of things on the fly, but that sometimes can feed our ADHD because we're very good in crisis.
Mm-hmm.
You can come to us and we will be able to help you figure out a complex problem at the speed of light, because our brains react to that urgency And
Hmm.
so we are able to prioritize that work in front of us when it's urgent and in a crisis, especially for like people we love or something we're passionate about, or a legit crisis like a flood, or you're dealing with something insane. So
Yeah. And does it affect you as well when you're talking about how it the problem, like almost problem solving just on a different level? Like I always see, like, no matter what, whether it's washing the car, driving, or anything, I feel like my brain automatically goes to protective mode, or like it sees what could go wrong and then works backwards. Like, okay, well, you just got to make sure you pull your car up further so it doesn't hit this, or it's like you could see like almost all the problems happening in real time in your head. And then it's like you get in front of it. Does that make sense?
it absolutely does. And there's two things at play there that I've seen and read about when it comes to our brains as people with ADHD. One of them is, since we've been redirected so many times, it's like that anxiety
Mhm.
about doing something incorrectly, something seemingly simple. So we have that anxiety that is working with us at that moment, thinking about everything that could go wrong. So we're trying to be perfectionists when we don't allow ourselves the grace to just be. And
Mhm.
so there's that. And then there's also, our brain is constantly connected to all of the other experiences that we've had. And either we're trying to prevent it from happening, or we just see the world around us differently. And we can see all the different ways in which the street and the traffic are coming together. And we're trying to be cautious to prevent a wreck or to properly parallel park. And we are understanding the world in a multi-sensory way where not everybody is pulling in all those inputs. We are
Mhm.
highly sensitive people, and depending on the different type of ADHD that you have.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and what would you say? And we were kind of talking about tips earlier as far as like fonts for words and stuff, and I wanted to kind of go
Yeah.
back to that for a second. As far as I feel like people with ADHD or dyslexia, as far as like getting motivated and getting stuff done,
Yeah.
because I myself like super passionate, like, and I'm OCD. Like once I have my like I set on something that I want, it's like go time. But
Yes.
I find it sometimes, or a lot of times, where it's just, oh man, it's just so hard to just get that ball rolling. And it feels like
Yeah.
I always make the reference of, it's like I feel like I'm looking up at Mount Everest. And it's just like, how is this going to happen?
Mm,
I get overwhelmed. You start thinking about all the bad stuff, and it's just like you get so
yeah.
overwhelmed, you literally do nothing. Like it freezes you.
You get an ADHD paralysis.
Yeah, or analysis
Yeah.
paralysis, whatever you want to call it. Yep.
Exactly. So when it
How do you get
comes
out of
to how do you
that?
get out of the paralysis? So there's a couple of things there. One, it's energy levels. So sometimes when you get into the paralysis, you have to stop, acknowledge the paralysis, and ask yourself, why am I feeling this way right now? Is it because the project is so overwhelming, or is it because I have been running myself ragged for the past 3 days, thinking I can finish a quarter's worth of projects in 3 days? Because I have before, because ADHDers sometimes have extremely high energy levels, and we achieve more than a day than some people do in a week. It's just sometimes how it works. So you have to allow yourself that space to acknowledge what the feelings that you're having, investigate what's going on in your mind and in your body. Like, am I feeling anxious about this project because I don't know the first step? Or is there a lot of pressure about this? Or do I legit not know where to start?
Mhm.
And so if you can identify if it's energy, if you're just low energy, you might need to set aside what you need to do, write down what you need to take care of, but give yourself some time to rest and identify what resting looks like for you, because it's different for every ADHDer. And because it could mean on the couch with Netflix for some, and it could mean going on a jog with your dog for others. And so there's that. But if you are in one of those spaces where it's not an energy level issue, it could be that you literally don't know the first step to take. And so what I coach my clients on is identify the first 3 steps you have to take and say them out loud. So that might be, and I had to do this to myself the other day, get out of bed, put your feet on the floor, make your bed, and kind of go and get the ball rolling just on simple things throughout the day. And when you get to the point of needing to do work, for example, I've got a big project that I need to start today. And so I'm going to start by writing down the first 3 steps I have to take. And I set a timer for 20 minutes. That's it. And so I start the project, start by the first 3 steps. And usually by the time the timer goes off, I'm already on a roll and I can keep going. But if the timer goes off and I'm still just not doing it, I give myself a break. I write down the next step that I'm going to take, and I'm going to come back to it later on. So a lot of it just comes down to understanding, is it your energy level, or do you just need to do slow steps, which is what I call, setting the timer and the top 3 steps you got to do.
It's like I said, it's just so weird because like everything you just said, I mean, I hit like just can relate. It's just like bing, bing, like the gate. As far as getting out of bed, I don't have a problem with, but I saw some motivational video from some like high ranked general or something that was like the first thing you need to do is like make your bed. It's just like just to get the ball rolling. So I heard that a couple years ago, and it's like I've just always done it. And it's so funny you mentioned the timer thing. Give me 2 seconds. I'm not even going to edit this out because I think you'll find this really funny. I got to get something. Give me 2 seconds.
Okay.
Hold on.
Absolutely.
All right.
Oh boy. Yes, I have one of those. I don't have it right here in front of me, but I have it on my workstation in the other room.
So for those of you not watching, what am I holding in my hand?
You're holding a timer, a box, a cube. And on each side has numbers on it, 5, 15, 30, and 60, right?
Yep. And
Yep.
Oddly enough, that thing, like, it's weird. That thing was like maybe $5, and you could tell it was obviously made overseas. I mean, it's not the most glamorous thing, but for $5, that thing will keep you in line, and I have to take it with me everywhere.
Yeah. And what's funny is that the whole making the bed thing, there are some ADHDers that doesn't work for them. What I tell them is that they've got a different way to get their ball rolling, or their domino effect happening. But timers, I have the cube one that you have, and then I have a visual timer. So I can see how long stuff takes me to do, like actually see it, because we have time blindness, where it's like, we know that a movie will take an hour and a half, roughly, maybe 2 hours, but we don't recognize that it might take us 3 hours to do something around the house when we think it's going to take 15. And it's, or the opposite is true. It's like, we think something's going to take 20 minutes and it takes 5. And so those timers are helpful, because I end up gamifying my house chores with those. And so I'm like, okay, I do not want to clean my house, but my house is a mess, hot mess. Things are everywhere. And it's making me it's challenging me to actually be productive and do my jobs. So I turn it to 20 minutes or turn it to 30 minutes, turn on some music, things that are going to get me moving. And I'm like, how much can I clean in this living room, and how much laundry can I fold in this amount of time? And honestly, 9 times out of 10, I finish before the timer goes off. And I'm like, wow, that was not that bad.
And if you didn't have the timer on, it would probably take you over an hour.
Oh yeah, no, 100%. It totally would, because I've done it before where I'm just like, why is this taking me so long? But gamifying is a great way to do it. ADHDers, we do competition, even just with ourselves, really well. So if you have challenges with motivation, sometimes gamifying, body doubling. I don't know if you've heard of body doubling before.
No, I'm super curious, because gamifying, we'll talk about it we'll go back to it in a second, because I do that with that. Yeah, we'll go back to that. But yeah, tell me more about the
body doubling is very common, and I encourage my clients to do that as well. Basically what that is that you can't get stuff done unless somebody is sitting with you. They don't have to be working with you. They don't have to be babysitting you. You just need somebody else present. And I use this even with, I've got a child who is in elementary school, and he knows I have ADHD. And sometimes I'll be like, dude, can you just come sit next to me and play your video game while I pay bills? And he's like, sure, mom. And he comes and brings his Switch in and just sits next to me has his headphones on. I just need somebody else there. So there's a lot of online platforms. TikTok has lots of communities called work buddies, where they'll go on a TikTok live and they're just working. So they have virtual co-working spaces where it's like, okay, tell me what your goals are for the next 25 minutes. And everybody puts their goals into the chat. And then somebody's like, okay, Bob, 25 minutes is over. Did you finish paying your electric bill?
That is so funny, because I've been doing this just like unbeknownst to like what the actual name was. Cause even working in newsrooms, like I would get my story done early and back to the studio. So I'm just like working by myself, taking my sweet ass time. And then all of a sudden everybody gets back. And then I'm just like, I start getting on it. So that is so interesting. Yeah, I've noticed that when you're around people, it definitely helps, even in like like you said, like virtual settings. I've done that before, where me and my buddy will just be on Google Hangout and you can see them in the corner of your screen, but we're not even talking. We're just working. Like you would never know. But that is super interesting.
Yeah. I'm a part of a ADHD female entrepreneurs group, and they have those a couple of times a week, where it's just a virtual group of women who are entrepreneurs with ADHD. And we get on, tell each other what our goals are for the hour, and then everybody goes on mute. It's genius. And people who are neurotypical are like, that seems weird now. And the rest of us are looking at each other like, yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. Have somebody else just... Cool. That sounds great. So those are some of the tools when it comes to motivation that you can use, and from timers to body doubling to identifying your energy levels, there's lots of things to do. Yeah. Yeah.
And it's like I said, I've been doing a lot of things like gamifying. I use that word a lot, and it's funny that it's an actual term, because like, one of the pillars for my program is presence, like your online presence, or excuse me, like your on camera presence, to like be yourself and stuff. But to get to that, like I've been super into fitness for ever since high school. And it's like, if you feel good, if you feel good, you look good, you're just going to be completely different. Like I feel a difference on day 3, kind of what I have my students go through. And it's like I said, it's intermittent fasting mixed with like calorie tracking, but the fitness industry demonizes calorie tracking. But it's like I've made it fun, like a game. So it's like, oh, well, I eat this, so it's like now I can get this, so I don't go over this number. And it's like, even if I went over a little tomorrow, all I have to do is fast just a little bit longer and then eat this, and like eat good, like food that's good, like pizza, donuts, cake. Like I got obsessed with like protein pancakes. Like it's just because when people think diet, it sucks and it's not sustainable. But when you gamify it, and it's like you actually don't have to give up foods that you actually like, you just gotta tweak them a little bit. It like tricks your brain into like, this is what else can I do? Yep. Absolutely. Yep. So we talked a lot about body doubling, was it called? Body doubling, and oh crap, now the ADHD is kicking in. What was it in gamifying? Working in corporate America, what did we miss anything that we were, as far as what you see people have and how they deal with it? Oh, yeah. So when you work in corporate America, I spent about 15 years working in corporate America. And one of the biggest challenges is that for people with ADHD is when you're trying to move up the ladder, so to speak, you take on what other people view as success. And so you see promotions, you see new projects, you see all these new exciting opportunities. And sometimes you can't figure out what you want, because we inherently have, we're multi-passionate people. Our brains are ignited by novelty and urgency. And so when there's a new project that's exciting and important in the organization, we want to be a part of it. And we can bring a lot to the table more often than not. And so when I work with people who are in corporate America and they're seeing their colleagues outpace them for promotions,
they feel like they're being left behind. They're not valued, but they also feel burned out and taken advantage of. And so you're laughing.
I know, because oh my God, you're just like, I'm like, yes, I have
Yeah.
so many examples of this, but I don't want to
Yes.
catch
Yeah,
like yeah.
They feel burned out and taken advantage of for many reasons. The most typical one, and I experienced this too, is that they take on so much. They're doing so many projects and they're dependent on so much because their ability to jump right in, to ignite passion, to share projects, to really research and envelop themselves in new things, that they get buried. And then what happens is that everybody else's projects are their projects. And then they get pigeonholed into a certain area. And so what happens then is that instead of, that really crappy advice of like, be present, which is what I can't stand when, people tell women that, it's like, well, I am present, I'm ignored. That's a different conversation. But that happens with people with ADHD, men and women, all the time. And it's even worse if you're a woman or a person of color or any other marginalized group. So it just starts to get magnified over and over. And so for people in corporate America, when they go through those things, they end up getting burned out faster because they think their hard work is a part of, their pride, how they connect back with the business. But it's the work that they're doing isn't often rewarded the same way that a neurotypical's is. So our strengths end up sometimes being our downfall, if not properly harnessed within themselves in corporate America.
And and I'm just, because like when you said you do it for corporations, I was a little shocked because I know just like in schools, there's not many, like, I feel like still our public education system just doesn't know still what to do. And then it's like, okay, well, if they don't know what to do, how are these corporations, how do they know what to do? And it's like the people who, I mean, I'm self-diagnosed. Like I've never had a doctor.
Which is still a valid diagnosis, by the way.
Yeah. Cause I mean, because people are like, well, you're self-diagnosed. It's like, I literally looked at every single symptom. This is not WebMD where it's like, oh yeah, I could be dying tomorrow, whatever. It's like,
it's not Crohn's. Yeah.
Yeah. It's like every single thing. I was like, so it's like, I didn't even know corporations were hiring for a position like that. And the people who work there, how do they know? Some people ignore it. I ignored it forever. And then it's like, it was too late when I found out. And then it's like, well, what do I do? And then how do I know my company has a person like you?
So my goal is to work with companies as somebody who can consult with them and to empower their managers and their leaders to understand the value in our humanity and not to infantilize. I can never say that word correctly, infantilize us, because we don't need somebody necessarily to hold our hand. We need them to understand how our brains work and how we work. That, we could go 3 weeks working constantly for a huge launch, right? But like any human, we can't keep up at that pace. But sometimes we feel like we need to power through, but it might take us a little bit longer to rest up and get back on a regular pace again. And so the challenge that you mentioned is like in schools, they still don't necessarily know how to work with brains like ours. They don't. Teachers aren't given the resources. The research isn't always completely there. It's only done in one type of ADHD in the past. So in my mind, all that does is reinforce the need for corporations and organizations, nonprofits, big, small, to have people in the diversity, equity, and inclusion space focusing on neurodiversity so that we're able to be at the table to say, yes, and. Yes, we are valuable employees. You should not exploit us, just like you shouldn't exploit other people with disabilities. And we're also here to be amazing colleagues and to be phenomenal. We're incredibly loyal. We're thoughtful. We're empathetic. We can read rooms, which is a part of the challenge too sometimes because we feel other people's feelings very deeply. And so it's, to me, without having it in the school systems done very well at all, if at all, it just elevates the reason and the importance for it to be an opportunity for businesses to be leaders in that space.
Yep. Yep. But it's one of those things where it's like, I always treat it like I just, even working in news and working in Hollywood, I saw so many things and got passed up for so many things, but it's just like, I kind of chalked it up to where it's not, I mean, unfortunately, like, life isn't
You're not
fair.
hustling hard enough, or you don't want it enough.
Yep, that, and it's just that at some point it's just like you got to tap out, but but it's just like anything else, like you've got to figure it out. Like like life to me, I've always been a pick yourself up by your bootstraps thing. Like, if it's not working, you need to figure it out. Like, life is not fair and no one owes you anything. And if people are going to pass you up for a skin color, an orientation, a disability, then there are people out there, and that sucks. But once again, it's life, and you've got to figure it out. Like, even when I was in LA, I had my dream job on the red carpet and interviewing celebrities, and I got passed up so many times. And it's just, at some point, you just got to step back, and it's like, and I don't know how much about that industry, where it's like, for any one of those jobs, you have to have a demo reel, which is like a video resume. You've got to go through the audition process. So you have to have headshots. So you're judged immediately by what you look at. Right. So that's 2 hurdles. You've got to find an agent, a good agent. That should be like 10 steps. And then, okay, you get the audition. But then it's like, then you have to do a second audition, then a third, then a fourth, meeting with the producer, and you may get the job. So
the process is onerous.
Well, you have no control. And it took me forever. And finally I was on a Zoom call when the pandemic first hit, and the actors and that we were all on the call with were freaking out because like, the entertainment industry shut down, like in the beginning of March 2 years ago, right when it first hit. And I'm thinking to myself, I was like, I don't know why the word pathetic like came through my head, but I was like, I feel like we are like begging for our job, like, please hire me. I was like, this is not the move. Like, I am not going to allow my future to be dependent on 10 other people who may or may not like me. And it's like, this is not it. So I have to venture out and start my own business, put all my knowledge, kind of like what you're seeing in this new creator movement, and just shift. So it's just go ahead.
Do you know the percentage of the likelihood for somebody with ADHD to open their own business?
No, what is it?
300%. 300% more likely to open your own business.
And that's a good thing.
Yes, I completely agree. Yeah. And the challenge that I also heard when you're telling that story is, as somebody else with ADHD, you have struggled a lot and you didn't always understand why. And you also had to pick yourself up and be like, I'm having a bad day. This is supposed to be really easy, but I found ways to work around it. You're constantly innovating and constantly finding a new way to do it better, faster, cheaper, and new, different ways to do things. And sometimes when something stops working, it's devastating, but it also is like, okay, this is all I know. So people who are neurotypical, who have gone through, the normal life cadence of like college, job, promotion, doing all the right things, being able to say no to projects so they can prioritize other work that's important to their boss, like they can go through that cadence. And then when they're hit with a wall like the pandemic, they're frozen. They're not sure what to do. And so and this is another great example of people with ADHD being amazing in a crisis, because this is what we do. Like, we know how to innovate and pivot. And sometimes people hate us for it. But the reality is that those are valuable tools that you can bring to yourself and your families and your communities as a whole. being that, because in those moments we might seem scattered other times, but in those moments we are a guidepost because we are firmly planted and we know that we can get through this.
When you explain that to CEOs and business owners, how did they usually take that? Or what did they have, or what type of reaction do they usually have?
When I'm doing like sales calls and trying to understand what their needs are, typically they come at it from this is a checklist on a DEI initiative we have. And when I approach it, and this is what I try to do, I approach it in that way that I just said, that have you needed to pivot? Do you have a challenge with change? Do you have people who are you're wanting them to ask more questions and be curious? This is what people with neurodiverse brains bring. Dyslexics have the ability to think in 3 dimensions. Neurotypicals don't. And that's something that is very difficult for neurotypicals to understand, is that dyslexics are able to think in multi-dimensions and to fit things in just by looking at it. And that's incredible when you're talking about engineers, but that engineer might need somebody to double check and a partner to work with for some parts of the project, but they're able to see multi-dimensions without even doing scales on a computer. So when I focus on problem solving, I focus on the markets because one of my hyperfixations that I do is I'm constantly looking at markets in the news. As somebody who wanted to go into journalism and radio, that's just something that still feeds me. And so I bring those things up and say, what if you had somebody that in a crisis, they stood there as calm as day? Because that is when their brain is activated and they've already got the 15th step going on in their brain that they can activate with other people. What if you had that person on your team? And then when it was calm, that is the time where they, did other things and they're able to be a motivator for the team and they're able to do project management and really be that consistent guidepost.
It's so interesting. Nope, sorry, go ahead.
Nope, go ahead.
It's so funny you said how our brain shifts into crisis, because working in news, the world's on fire all the time. And while everyone was like I'll never forget this in my first job, I guess like basically the system that allows you to go on TV went down and everybody was running around like you just kicked over an anthill, right? And I am cool as a cucumber. I'm just like, I could almost like feel this. I don't know how to describe it, but it was just like this internal, like it was like a burn, but it was good. And it was just like, okay, I am going to like I said, everything's almost in slow motion. Everybody's running around.
Yes.
And I've got tunnel vision. And when I'm on the weather wall, they're in my ear, like extend. And I am just dragging this weather cast out while people are running through the studios, and I'm just like going, they're just like, keep going. And I just kept going. It's just weird how that works. And it's just from like, I know we don't have like a neurological scan or something, but it would be really interesting to see like in a time of crisis. I don't know how you would do that on how the brain actually would work like that. But that's, like I said, it's just crazy you say that because it's just hitting so close to home, just everything you're saying. It's like, you know what you're talking about.
Yeah, that's the goal, right? So the funny thing there is that I've also tried to caution people that you can't live in that space constantly, that space of panic and that space of crisis, because those hormone levels will, it can do damage to you, right? And so when you only live in a constant state of crisis, which happens to a lot of people with trauma, with their living environment, you have to learn to uncondition that so you can rest, so you can be that person that you can be. So absolutely. So when you talk with organizations, when you do the news, if you had that every single day, which the news and journalism, the world is always on fire. There's always something to be hot about. Mm-hmm. And you also have to find that balance of giving yourself that space to rest so that you can recharge your batteries.
Yeah, news was definitely interesting. And this was pre-2016 when news was news, and we can talk, that's a whole different conversation too. Man, there's just, I'm just trying to think. So When you with corporations and stuff, but is your goal to, I mean, obviously you want to, stay on with these corporations and let them actually no, scrap everything I just said. Sorry. I just remember what I was going to say. My brain just clicked right there.
Yeah.
Do you think it is the reason I think there's not a lot of help for dyslexics and ADHD, or people don't know what to do, or just how people view it, is because just the buzzword is learning disorder when it's actually, in my opinion, a strength?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It comes down to stigma and not understanding. And so, yeah, I mean, ADHD is considered a disorder 100%. And it's something that you can get accommodations for under the American Disabilities Act. And so people position it as a liability sometimes. They're like, well, so like, for example, I have ADHD and dyslexia, and I used to work in revenue management. It actually is incredibly interesting to me because you're dealing with data sets coming from all over the company, right? And you're aligning different things with different data points. And that to me was phenomenal. And when I went in to ask for accommodations, I was met with comments like, but they allow you to work with numbers. And I looked at her and she goes, I see what I did there. And I was like, good. What did you do? And she was like, I should not have, she's like, I made an assumption. And I was like, yes, you did. It's a stigma. It's a myth. So it's like, yes, we can make mistakes, but so can neurotypicals. Like, I mean, get over yourself. And so when the whole thing about opening up people's minds to realizing that it's a stigma and that we can work through the challenges that they have about these people, quote unquote, or this type of person, which is what I would hear a lot when I'm talking to leaders, is that they're worried about the liabilities. They're also worried about not understanding how to support, because managers of yesteryear were told that people who reported to them should acclimate to their management style. Leaders now, good leaders now, understand that you are there to serve the people that report to you and other people in an organization, right? So that change in generations, right? We still have lots of people who still prescribe to that, I'm your manager, you deal with my communication style. We still have that toxicity. But we're having a shift where people are saying, like, I want to be a servant to people who work with me. And I want to serve not just my colleagues, but the people who report directly to me. And so working with them on a leadership mindset where they're there to be like a servant leader. Because at the end of the day, all it is realizing that everybody kind of has a different way of working because we're humans and our brains work differently than a neurotypical's. It doesn't make them any less valuable. It doesn't make them any less skilled. They're just different, and that's okay. And so really I try to come at it from a leadership perspective versus from like an inefficient management or stigma heavy, just recognizing some of the ways that they can work with people with ADHD or dyslexia.
And do you find that it's like a 50-50 split as far as companies being on board with it, and then other companies just kind of like, we'll get to it later, or just not taking it as serious?
I will be frank, most people do not take it very seriously, and they are losing out. So most of the conversations I've had recently with individuals who are interested in expanding their diversity, equity, and inclusion, it's that thing where they thought that quote DEI would be over by now. And I'm just like, you are missing the point of diversity, equity, and inclusion if you feel like it's a fad. It's a fad. Because I mean, it's not going to go away. Like, people are different, and you have different ways that you can include various populations in the work that you do, whether you're a nonprofit, a for-profit corporation, or an association. And understanding the different needs of different populations is critical to consistent service, to profitability. That's always what I like to talk about, is profitability. And because that's what corporations want to know about. And if you are able to engage an employee a certain way, that actually behooves your organization, not just in loyalty and retention, but engagement in the work that they're doing over time, which helps the business completely. So,
And I know you like working with corporations, but we were talking about how it's 300% of us decide to start their own thing, and you have your own thing as well. At any point, do you plan on going full time on what you're doing now and kind of let corporations maybe even deal almost like I tried to tell you guys, you're not listening. I'm going to do this full time, and almost, because I don't know about you, but I've almost gone full fledged into convincing everybody to just stop working for somebody else and start your own thing. So you can basically be free to, with your creativity, you don't feel like you're stupid, or you don't you just kind of do it yourself and not rely on these companies that truly don't give a flip about you.
Yeah. So I do think that there are some companies that are trying. But I am going in full time on one-to-one coaching with people with ADHD. I actually just launched it a couple of weeks ago for people with ADHD that work in the corporate world. So I was talking with a woman this week who is incredibly creative, and she sees corporate, but she's burning out of the corporate life, right?
Mm-hmm.
So she's trying to find coping strategies to help learn how to manage her energy. So that's what we're focused on. Mm. And I know whenever I say energy, it sounds so woo-woo, but it's really not.
It's woo-woo until it starts happening, and then you're like, whoa. Because I was the same way. I definitely came around until stuff started to shift.
Yes, absolutely. So we're prioritizing her understanding her energy patterns and when she can work, when she shouldn't work, how to recognize when she's going into a low energy day, and what a low energy routine looks like. And the goal of that is to really get her in a position where she's able to succeed in her role, and she sees it as a means to an end. So she wants to go out on her own in the next 3 to 5 years, but she needs to heal herself first. So she has health insurance, because America. So she has health insurance. So she has a steady paycheck, and she has things that she wants to do financially before she jumps ship. So I'm helping her with that, navigating the corporate world, especially when it comes to politics, because sometimes people with ADHD have that challenge, understanding the political game, because we tell people when we have a problem or a challenge that we might see coming up, and not everybody likes that. So we're learning to navigate those types of challenges and energy management, so she can go out and do her own thing, which she'll kick butt at. I know she will. So sometimes it's about preparing the exit as much as it is making the exit.
Yeah. And does that kind of the satisfaction you get with helping others with our I'm going to say with our advanced way of thinking, what does that do for you on a mental level? How does that make you feel when you see people when things start working and you start seeing the transformations in your clients and students?
When I start seeing the transformation, so working with people even just a short period of time, and they're doing things like actually doing self-care. And self-care looks different for different people, but they're actually doing self-care. They're setting firm boundaries than they've never set before, because they've always wanted to be that quote unquote stable person in their family. Meaning they ended up becoming a doormat, right? They were solving everybody's problems but their own. So when I start seeing them setting boundaries and make healthy choices for themselves, I get chills. It puts me on cloud 9. That is my favorite thing, because ultimately we need to learn how to work with our ADHD and stop working against it. And so when we learn to work with it, that's when, like you said, these are amazing skills to have. These are strengths. Yes. And when we have these challenges, we need to learn to work with the challenges and what they really do to us. And once we embrace those and learn coping strategies to work with them, we can catapult our strengths a gajillion miles into the air. where all the things that we know we can do, we will do.
Yeah.
And that's the beauty of it. And that's what keeps me going every single day.
That's awesome. Well, Kristina, I could talk to you about this all day, all day. But my last question is, if you could only create one more piece of content to go out into the world, to the universe, and the numbers didn't matter, the analytics didn't matter, the followers, all that stuff didn't matter, what would you put out and why?
I would put out to tell people who are neurodivergent that they matter, their brain is important, and it's not always about production and productivity. Their amazing skills that they have are valuable, and this world is better off with them than without them. And if anybody is telling you otherwise, screw them.
And why would you choose that piece specifically?
Because we're told oftentimes, and so throughout our lives continuously, that how we're thinking is weird or wrong or different. And history shows us that amazing innovators and amazing creative people are neurodivergent. And they've brought phenomenal art to the world. They've brought amazing, terrific productions. They've created new things. They've broken things down. They've stopped political movements and started new things. And I think we can be inspired and empowered by that instead of feeling like we need to be constricted.
Awesome. And if people want to work with you, where can they find you online?
Yeah, so my website has neurodivergentventures.com. That goes to I've got a free 3-day mini course on there where people can learn about setting ADHD friendly goals that don't burn you out. That's what I'm focusing on right now. And then I'm also on Instagram, Kristina Proctor NC. And then of course on TikTok as ADHD Coach Tina.
Awesome. And then whether you're watching this on YouTube or just listening, I will link all of her info below. And Kristina, once again, thank you so much for taking the time today.
Thank you so much, Thomas. This is a lot of fun.